So we're talking about the Florida Board of Medicine, and Friday they did make a decision to go ahead and begin the process of removing the WPATH protocols for transgender affirming care and replace it with their own that is based upon the very biased and very ill-informed opinion of very few doctors. Those doctors who represent the American Medical Association, the American Association of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Association, they've all agreed that WPATH standards and protocols for care are adequate for dealing with transgender youth, children, and adults. But a very biased, very anti-trans and trans-antagonistic psychiatrist has put forth many different reports for the Florida Board of Medicine, which led them to essentially remove any and all transitioning options for transgender youth and moved them over to a detransitioning path that could lead them into conversion therapy. Now, this is not an immediate effect. This is something that's going to happen over time as they begin the rollout of these new protocols.
Now, Jeannie, is this the gentleman we were talking about last week who has been kind of the Republican talking head for anti-trans and LGBT issues? Yeah.
This is the doctor that we were talking about last week who has basically been their primary source for any of their trans issues that they've been working out. Satan's Wet Butt Cheek, you may have to be follower of the Transverse because sometimes it is followers only chat. So
chat is followers only, absolutely. All right, moving on. Ted Cruz calls Democrats transgender socialist wackos.
So this is more just sort of light filler and fluff. Of course, Ted Cruz is not to be taken seriously as an evaluator of the Democratic Party. But Ted Cruz posted on Twitter that this is not your father's Democrat Party. These are a bunch of transgender wacko socialists. For context, if the Inflation Act is passed, it'll reduce the deficit by over $300 billion, and taxes won't go up for anyone making under $400,000 a year. Now, I'm not really sure how being a bunch of transgender wacko socialists relates to the Inflation Reduction Act, because to the best of my knowledge, there are very few transgender economists currently working for the Democratic Party. So I don't know how being transgender wacko socialists plays out in his review.
Yeah, none of the three of those words work into why we're in a high inflation era right now.
Right. Yeah.
And why we're having supply chain issues.
Right.
Moving on, the UK government now put out a big study of women's health strategies while purposely ignoring trans issues.
Yep.
What's going on here?
So this was a plan that's been at work from the UK health system to basically try and get rid of discriminatory rulings for like fertility treatment for same-sex couples. And while it does mark a step forward for inclusive healthcare, in the 125-page strategy, transgender women were not included anywhere in the entirety of it, and trans men and non-binary folk were mentioned only in one paragraph. So those who have been involved in the development have suggested that this was a conscious choice. This was something that seems to be intentional on the part of those who were a part of the strategy board. Of course, any LGBT inclusive organizations in the UK are coming out to express their disappointment and the the way that the health system has let transgender women, non-binary, and trans men down in this lack of inclusion in what is supposed to be an inclusive effort for the national health system.
And one of the big ways that this affects folks is that, a lot of the systems will sort of automatically pop up a reminder to, contact a patient and make sure that they've got something set up for regular screenings for cancers and things like that. And ignoring trans folks ignores the issues that might need to be looked into for them. So like a trans woman might need prostate screenings, but depending on how she's registered with her doctor, that might not come up. That flag might not come up, and that will be ignored. Same thing on the other side. So,
well, and also, I mean, when we start talking about inclusive medical care for women, transgender women must have breast cancer screenings.
Mm-hmm.
The process of it undergoing medical transition is going to increase our relative chances to develop breast cancer to the same level that cisgender women experience. Mm-hmm. So we have to talk about that inclusion. You're right. Typically going to a gynecologist for a prostate screening is not practical. But also talking about that when a patient is in a primary care or a urologist, it is a matter of saying that this is a transgender woman who should be treated according to these guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Moving on, LGBTQ icon Jim Obergefell wins Ohio primary.
So Obergefell is, of course, the plaintiff in the Obergefell versus Hodges. That was the Supreme Court decision in 2015 that made same-sex marriage a constitutional right. Well, Jim Obergefell is running unopposed on the Democratic ticket and will now face the Republican incumbent J.D. Swearingen in November. So this is kind of cool, bringing around the importance of, those who have gone before to fight for certain rights. Now we have somebody whose actual case is being threatened by the current sitting Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's great to see him take that further step of advocacy.
Yes.
Moving back over to back across the pond, essentially. Hungary Prime Minister, during his CPAC speech, calls for less drag queens, more Chuck Norris. What's going on here?
So this is more of an expansive article dealing with the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban was invited to speak at the Conservative Political Action Conference last week here in the U.S. Now, Orban has been recognized as someone who fulfills certain descriptions and definitions of a tyrant. As the Prime Minister of Hungary, he has shown himself to be very anti-LGBTQ. So he was invited to be a part of this conservative PAC meeting, Political Action Conference, and began to go on with his rhetoric that he has been very famous for. He said, "I can already see tomorrow's headlines. Far-right, European, racist, anti-Semite strongman, the Trojan horse of Putin, holds a speech at the conservative conference. They did not want me to be here, and they made every effort to drive a wedge between us. Then he claims certain sections of the media hate him and his country, just as they hate the Republicans and conservatives and slander them. During his keynote speech, he talked about his plans for bans on LGBTQ plus content, and the idea of bringing the U.S. and Hungary together to fight globalists and progressives. We must take back the institutions in Washington and in Brussels. We must coordinate the movement of our troops because we face the same challenge. And then used a lot of his time period to basically just dig at the LGBTQ plus community. Hungarians decided we don't need more genders. We need more rangers, less drag queens, and more Chuck Norris. Now, I want to keep this in perspective. This is an individual who has been declared by some to be a dictator. He was invited to the Conservative Political Action Conference to be a headline speaker. This individual uses the word strongman, and when we talk about that language, we're talking about people who typically break certain rules or laws in the national operation, in the international world of how we define what is a democratic country. Last week, or the week before last, when he was in Hungary, he made a speech where he decried, he said that Europe was becoming a mixed race society. He says, we do not want to become peoples of mixed race, which, if you know anything about the National Socialist Party in the 1930s, the idea of being pure as a race was a big push for the National Socialist Party. So Orban has been connected with Donald Trump, with Tucker Carlson, has been connected with all of these people who are moving to basically end LGBTQ rights here in the US, and he's supporting it from Hungary. So we're talking about, if let's just call it what it is. When you invite a fascist dictator to speak at your political action conference, that should give you an idea of who you are idolizing. Mm-hmm. So we might as well just go ahead and invite the reanimated form of a certain Austrian who was very well known from the 1930s.
Yeah, one of the things that why he's looked up to so much by the Republican Party is he's made great strides in laws and in the democracy in Hungary to erode it and remove democracy and become a dictator, making it, they have free and fair elections, but he's actually made it impossible for a free and fair election to remove him from office. And that's something that the Republicans are taking, into their playbook, and why they're looking up to him so much. It's just so interesting that somebody can come out and say these things. We've said this many, many times in the show, that people are coming out and saying these outrageous and horrific things and still getting away with it, still getting applauded and things like that during, from members of the right-wing party. And it's terrifying. And, that's the thing that we're worried about another Trump term is it's very likely that democracy will not survive it.
Well, and even if democracy takes a hit, that's not the problem. It's how many lives are we going to lose in the process? because before democracy takes the damage that, is being forecast, there are going to be people involved. We are going to see people pretty much rounded up and treated to certain conditions and circumstances that are horrific. We will see that.
The far right in the UK is putting forth a strong backlash against drag queens, spreading, that is coming from the US, the US backlash to drag queens that we've been seeing, against all of our drag story hours and things like that, and just drag shows in general. That has apparently been seeping over into the UK. What's going on there, Jeannie?
So, we're really talking about just the spread of ideology, and the Proud Boys and other organizations in the US, as well as Christian right groups, that they have been pushing into public spaces to remove any type of activity that has drag performers involved. Now, it may not be a drag performance. Most times the story hour is a drag performer reading a book. But this is where we are seeing them kind of spread and go beyond the idea of just attacking drag performers. This is about pushing through to say, these people are dangerous. Now we're seeing this spread to the UK. We're seeing this show up in a few other places as well, such as I think Australia had one case, but this is definitely moving to an international, effort to remove drag performers from public. Now, we want to always reiterate this. The Transverse and its companion organization, the Transverse on Discord, does not consider drag performers to necessarily be transgender people. What we recognize is that within the broad understanding of what transgender represents, drag performers are just a small portion of that umbrella. They are their own group of people with their own identities, and we celebrate those, and we support drag performers in what they are going through right now.
Still in the UK, an organization we've talked about a lot, the LGBT Alliance has filed a legal bid to ban trans women from drag shows.
Yeah.
So now we're getting it from both sides. What's going on here?
Well, this is actually in Australia. And
it's okay.
Yep. So lesbian drag king Jess Hoyle wanted to hold a drag night for adult human females. In a submission by LGBT Alliance Australia on Hoyle's behalf, it explained, "We do not want participants who are male-bodied humans attending regardless of how they identify. Lesbians or homosexuals. This is an event to celebrate lesbians and, in particular, provide a safe venue without unwanted presence, attention, or aggression of male-bodied people." So the LGBT Alliance in England and in Australia and now in the US is very much dedicated to eliminating transgender women. They are trying to remove them from validity. They are trying to remove them as legally as presenting them as threats and predators to femme-bodied individuals, whether that be cisgender women or trans men or non-binary. They want to remove transgender women from all women's spaces, and they want to present them as predators who should be stopped by all means.
Which, of course, there's nothing to react to that except with fury because of the fact that it is the the rest of the world that are the danger, and the danger specifically to trans folks, to children. It's ridiculous.
It is. It really is.
A right-wingers on social media are calling for LGBTQ plus people to be put in camps over monkeypox.
Ethan Schmidt Crockett had posted a video on social media, and his release basically said, we need to quarantine and isolate all the folks of the LGBT community. We need to find all of them. We need to hunt them down and put them into isolation camps for their own protection. He asked why the U.S. government isn't speaking out against reprobate fornication. And, we've talked about the idea that monkeypox or MPV is being identified by conservative and ignorant people to be a sexually transmitted infection, or it is a gay men's problem. It is actually just a skin-to-skin contact viral infection. So this is not a matter of it is, only homosexual men. It's not a matter of that it is about sexually transmitted infections, and neither is it about the idea of the LGBTQIAP plus community is harmful to the cis heteronormative world. This is just fear-mongering on the part of those people who want to demonize queer community, those people who want to justify in some way harm against the queer community. And finally, it is an intentional effort to create fear among anyone who is not smart enough to go find out the real information for themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen a lot of that with the anti-woke movement. Just stick your head in the sand and go along with what you're told.
Yeah,
because being woke and learning actual information on your own is a bad thing.
Right.
Now we're seeing in the next.
That's the thing. This is where the concept of concentration camps come. Whether we call them concentration camps or not, I want to remind everyone. Let's take our mind out of Germany for one moment and let's come to the U.S. 1940, 1941, there's a lot of suspicion. There's a lot of worry over what is happening in Germany, in Europe, and the U.S. is beginning to perceive tension that is mounting, that the U.S. is going to be drawn into World War II. 1941, December 7th, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. In the following 2 years, a plan is put in place to forcibly remove American citizens of Japanese descent from their homes and put them in camps located farther away from what is deemed to be military sensitive properties. For Japanese Americans, Japanese who have immigrated, or the generation of children born in the U.S. after immigration, there is a clear record of homes being seized, of businesses being closed and seized, and these camps are then put in place. I recommend that if you have not read about the Japanese internment camps in the U.S., spend some time, because what was basically the motivation behind that was that Japanese individuals were deemed a threat to national security. And so they were removed from those bases for their own protection. They were removed from those areas on the West Coast to protect them. So this is not new. Go and read up on Japanese internment camps or Japanese concentration camps. If you know anything about George Takei, who played Sulu in the original Star Trek, his family was placed in an internment camp. My personal interaction with that movement is with the Amache concentration camp in southeastern Colorado. But go and learn about this. Make this a place of knowledge growth.
We've talked a lot about folks registering as church to be able to take advantage of these religious freedom rights movements that are going on. And now we're seeing a backlash to that again. Hate groups are now registering as churches to get tax benefits and those protections. What's going on here, Jeannie?
So we talked about this last week or a week before. The Family Research Council is a far-right policy and activist group, political action group, that filed for and received a tax-exempt status as a church. Now, this is not a church. This is not designed as a church. This is a political action group of some form. And they filed as a church. That means that they've received the IRS, reclassification as a church. But 40 members of Congress have gotten together and written an open letter asking for the IRS and the Treasury Department to investigate this and any other far-right organizations that are trying to avoid federal taxes and audits by registering as churches. So there is a suspicion among these members of Congress that any groups that are filing right now that tend to have an anti-LGBTQ message as their center point, they need to be investigated as potentially using that tax exemption as an attempt to avoid the taxes and the audits that they would be required to give as another nonprofit organization.
The Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, to house trans prisoners based on genitals. Where is this happening and what's going on here?
Again, this is in the UK. It is a part of the movement to take transgender women and house them in male prisons. The Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab is looking at the idea of basically the decision is, what type of genitals do you have? And then making that decision to house them with genital similar bodies. So what is being used as justification here is that transgender women are being placed in women's prisons and they are assaulting cisgender women in the prisons. And they are basing all of this on the relative information that any male body in a women's prison becomes a sexual predator. There has been proof time and time again that it is not transgender women who are committing the majority of these crimes. It is, in fact, cisgender men or cisgender women who are committing these crimes of sexual violence.
And there was also something we had quoted before, and I'm forgetting the specifics, but that trans folks in prison who are outed as trans are harassed and assaulted, sexually assaulted by folks there at the prison, particularly the guard staff. Yep. But that was sort of regardless of of which prison you were in. It
Mhm.
didn't really even matter.
Yeah.
All right. We haven't said this name in a while. Lindsey Graham opposes same-sex interracial marriage protections. Why would he say that, and what's going on here?
So no one is surprised by Lindsey Graham coming out and saying this. He's, basically saying he's not going to vote for the Respect for Marriage Act. He calls it a federal government overreach of states' rights and the concept of giving, same-sex individuals the right to marry. But the thing is that he has been associated with certain comments that originally said he thought that same-sex individuals probably shouldn't have any kind of, limitations put on them. But at this point, as he appeared on Sunday's State of the Union, I think it was Sunday, but he said, I think states should decide the issue of marriage and states should decide the issue of abortion. I have respect for South Carolina. South Carolina voters here I trust to define marriage and deal with the issue of abortion and not 9 people on the court. That's my view. So, I mean, basically it comes down to, he's just wanting to make sure that he gets his name thrown into the, his hat thrown into the right circle to, be considered a serious ally of the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and marriage is so directly tied into federal issues, taxes, things like that. That yep. I don't know how they can think they can make this claim that it's a state's issue when there are particularly federal ties to whether or not you're married.
Well, and see, that's part of the issue is that it's not a federal issue either. You see, everywhere in the United States, all marriage licenses are filed at the state level. They are not filed in a federal way. It is the state that provides the legal relationship that the IRS then recognizes as if you're married, filing jointly, married, filing separately, or a single household. So it's not so much that there's federal recognitions that, have to be paid attention to. It's basically just the idea the states grant the status of marriage. IRS or any other government entity then recognizes that state established status.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that the issue here is that the states should have the leeway to enforce the laws, but to protect the rights of people. But I think the federal government should be the arbiter, should be the final word on the rights of the citizens of the country.
Yes, when we're talking about individual rights, it becomes a little more challenging because the rights of the individual do not outweigh the rights of the whole. And that's one of the things that we lose sight of when we talk about constitutional rights. The Constitution is established for the benefit of the whole. And so individual rights become very muddled in that case. So, for example, we can have the right to property. Okay? That's established, that we have the right to own property. But turn it around and the federal government recognizes the right of the state or the local government to seize property through eminent domain. So an individual does not have a right to property when the government of a local level or a state level, or even a federal level, deems it to be in the best interest of the government to seize that property.
Mm-hmm. Y'all, your rights are an illusion.
If the thing, if I were to talk about eminent domain, most people would look at me like, what am I talking about? In many states, your property, if it is deemed by a local government entity to not be making the right kind of money for the government entity, they can seize it as long as they have plans to create revenue off of it that is higher than what you're paying.
We had a crazy thing out here where there was a local railroad line that was, I believe, privately owned and was being sold. And the crazy thing about it was that a rail line is considered a public service. So even though it was privately owned, the private corporation then had rights to eminent domain, where they could claim properties to run rail lines where they deemed through like a loophole with the states and local governments having the right to eminent domain. It was a very fascinating thing to see how that worked out.
Yeah, and so when people tell you that we've been given the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which initially that phrase related to the owning of property, not the emotional state of happiness, but the owning of property. Because the Constitution was written with those statements, eventually we got to the place where we gave the rights back to the government so that they can take away your right to life, liberty, and property when it's deemed necessary for the good of the company, the good of the country.
Moving back over to Florida, I think we talked about Florida, right? Yeah, we did. We did. Cool. So we're going back there. Florida rains down restrictions on LGBTQ plus youth, gender affirming care.
Right. So this was posted to the list before the Friday meeting, but it's just the highlighting of how the state has basically denied the American Medical Association. It has denied WPATH's protocols and standards of care. So this was just talking about all of these, movements toward that. What is also happening at the same time is the closing of, and the attack on certain businesses that basically have anything to do with LGBTQ. So all of this is happening at the same time in Florida, but it's not the only place that it's happening, which is where the second article comes in. A bakery in the Chicago area has been vandalized, and people have been harassing them because there was a family-friendly drag event that was going to take place there. And because the owner of the bakery was just trying to do this very family-friendly type of thing, city officials have started to review her business license. She was told that her business was not zoned for entertainment purposes. There was concern over whether public resources were being used to protect the bakery after it was the target of a hate crime last month. So they are now looking at using local ordinances to harass and attack any type of LGBTQ friendly business.
And that's disappointing. I thought Chicago was a pretty decent place for LGBT rights and issues.
Everywhere is vulnerable.
Everywhere is what?
Everywhere is vulnerable.
Yeah. Every place is vulnerable. Every right is vulnerable. Oh, well, let's move over to my state, which is usually very positive news. But apparently, California police are 4 times more likely to stop trans people for reasonable suspicion.
So first of all, before you take all of your frustrations out on your state, just recognize that California is one of the few states that keep statistics that include transgender people. So this is one of the reasons why we have information that shows us this.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to cisgender men and women, transgender individuals are stopped proportionately 4 times what cisgender people are stopped. And the reason for the stop is a reasonable suspicion, which means they don't have a real reason. They just think they do. Now, the report is based on data from 58 of the state's largest law enforcement agencies. And instead of a specific violation or a clear unlawful behavior, nearly half of all the stops were reasonable suspicion. Now, the data includes all people stopped by police, whether the officers were responding to a potential offense they observed or to a call for service. So this is just showing that in a basic comparison of trans to cis, trans people have been stopped 4 times more. When we break it out into trans women versus trans men, the numbers are very close. 45% transgender women versus cisgender women, and 43% transgender men versus cisgender men. And when you take into account that many transgender people of color are targeted, not just for their gender, but also for their color, that gives a whole lot of the, it gives us a whole lot of clarity on these numbers. Mm-hmm. We're talking about, probably I can't see all of the pure data, but if we were to compare white versus BIPOC transgender individuals, we would see a huge number discrepancy between those two. Mm-hmm. But it also, we also beg people who are out there, please do everything you can to not bring any more undue attention to yourself from the police.
Mm-hmm. I wish we had some kind of information or indication in this of what is going on, why this might be the case.
I don't know why this is coming up. We don't have causality. We just have the results. And without taking the time to, dig into each one of those stops to find what the circumstances were, it's going to be hard to find that. But I will say this. California requires the police departments to report the demographic data of every driver, bicyclist, or pedestrian, and include perceived race, gender, and approximate age. So all of this data is being kept, and this is why we're getting to see these numbers now. So it's not a matter of California is worse. It's that California is actually providing us the tracking information.
Mm-hmm. It's still unfortunate information. It's still, kind of sad to hear. One of the worst parts of the article that I for me personally, is that interactions with police officers were also more likely to lead to drastic outcomes with trans folks, rather than as opposed to the cis community, with trans folks more likely to be searched, handcuffed, and arrested, as well as to have lethal and non-lethal force brought against them.
Right. Now, and we're not talking about lethal force to the point of, someone dying at the hands of a police officer, but we are talking about guns drawn as well as tasers or pepper spray.
Another one I just love to have so much more information on. Moving to Seattle, a Christian school is suing over the Washington Attorney General's probe of anti-LGBTQ+ bias. What's going on here?
Seattle Pacific University is a private Christian school, and they want to basically push back against the Attorney General because the Attorney General was investigating the school and how they actively kept from hiring LGBTQ plus individuals. So the discrimination laws, as we have them, pretty much outline that individuals cannot be discriminated against if they are LGBTQ plus and they receive, federal funds. Because Seattle Pacific is a Christian private university, they believe that it is a violation of their religious freedoms to be investigated for not hiring queer folk. And this is just one of those battles that goes back and forth, back and forth. The Attorney General is wielding state power to interfere with the religious beliefs of a religious university and a church whose beliefs he disagrees with. And that is from the complaint that was filed. In going back and forth on this, it's really a matter of religious freedoms versus rights of citizens. And so as long as we are in this battleground, we're going to continue to see this kind of stuff coming up. This is not new. It's something that's been around for 20 years that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just feel like it's something simple we should all be able to agree on, that if you want to protect your ability to discriminate against certain people, private organizations have a lot of rights there to do what they want. But you can't then take money from all people, including those people you're discriminating against, and use it to do that.
Right.
A decades-old cold case murder of a trans sex worker could be linked to a serial killer. Dark, but what does this lead us to?
So this is not anything, pressing and new. This is something, though, that I think it does speak to something good and positive for our community. So Adele Bailey went missing in 1978. Her body was found in 1995.
Wow.
But at that time, there was not enough evidence to charge the prime suspect with anything that has happened to her. Now, there has been a reopening sort of the case after some information reports were given a tip-off that linked Adele Bailey's death to a serial killer in Australia. Back in 1995, after the body was discovered, friends spoke to the police on 2 days, tipping them off that there may be a connection between this individual who was their friend and this potential serial killer at the time. Now, at that time, he had not been arrested, but he would go on to serve after being sentenced for the deaths. This is just being added to the idea that trans women who normally would not have cases reopened is getting a second chance at justice.
That is positive.
It is.
All right. So another anti-trans LGBT organization, Gays Against Groomers founder, compares trans-inclusive doctors to the Nazi angel of death.
Mm-hmm.
Deep breath. What's going on here?
So, interestingly enough, in the TikTok chat before the show, we were talking about the hashtag that is trending on Twitter right now. That is the LGB drop the T hashtag. And, we were basically talking about how lesbian and gay parts of the lesbian and gay community are wanting to distance themselves from the transgender community. So, Gays Against Groomers founder Jamie Mitchell said that gender affirming doctors are comparable to Joseph Mengele, who was a physician of atrocity, we might say, during the 1930s and 40s.
Yeah, he did a lot of experiments. I think there's some things that we know about transplants and things from some of the horrific experiments that he did, just completely unregulated and unchained there in the concentration camps.
Yeah. Specifically, Mengele was at Auschwitz, and it is probably one of the most well-known of the camps in Germany. But she was pushing the idea that gender-affirming healthcare professionals are using an entire generation of children as lab rats for this sick ideology, while also claiming that her multimedia coalition, Gays Against Groomers, is a roadblock and a threat to them. So what we have is that in that one collection of statements right there, you have ignorance about gender-affirming care being promoted. You have the idea that a generation of children are being subjected to this as a sick experiment, and you also have us being called groomers by a member of the gay community.
It's just absolutely disgusting. It's been so heartbreaking to see so much of the right wing rhetoric that is based on falsehoods and lies, and just things made up to further their own agenda.
Yeah.
To hear members of our own community starting to use that against us is like I said, it's disgusting.
It is.
That this thing with the story earlier, where WPATH, a world organization that studies this stuff and takes information from lots of sources and aggregates it and comes up with standards that are based on actual data and facts and important scientific research into these things. That stuff is being dismissed out of hand for whatever reason, just basically for their own agenda reasons, and it's ignored. And now you have people saying that we're in the wild west of gender care and that this is all experimental. There's no data about this, and it's all just complete lies. There's plenty of data. There's plenty of proof that it is very helpful to people. And like I said, to have somebody within our own community that's doing that is just absolutely horrifying.
Right. Now, there's a lot that's going on, within that, and we're trying to do the best we can to keep the sensationalism sorted from the news. But you're right. We have an abject rejection of peer-reviewed scientific information and scientific-based methods just so we can prop up a religious institution.
Didn't even realize that was had a religious basis at the core of it. Makes sense, though.
I mean, all of it is, Emily, because whenever we go back to the basics of what the argument is about denying gender-affirming care, it goes back to the idea that there are only two genders, that there are only two sexes, that there are men and there are women. And that is fundamentally a religious-based concept that has been accepted as a cultural norm. It is not a fact, because we can identify intersex conditions that have a large enough population that we can show that they are a significant portion of the overall population of the people. Secondly, we have shown through sociology, through history, through, psychology, that transgender people have always existed. This is not something new. But where we go in the world and we see where Western Christian influence was established at some point, we find this indoctrinated concept that male and female, man and woman, are the only options. Any other place in the world we can go and we can find exceptions to that concept.
Well, and we've talked at length of my minimalistic knowledge of the Bible and religion. But I was always under the impression that it was the soul that mattered. And I was under the impression that the soul was non-gendered. I would think that the belief that the body is just a vessel would seem to suggest that the outward gender is not the big deal that they're making it to be. And it's also kind of strange that they would eschew the idea that who you are inside your brain, your belief of who you are as a person, if it contradicts what your genitalia says, your genitalia overrules it. And it's just like, that just seems contrary to the soul idea and some of these other basic premises of the of religious faith.
Well, actually, what it comes down to is that in many evangelical Christian circles, you can't have a soul without sex.
Okay. All right. Let's jump from this topic back to Florida, because we just can't get enough of it. Ron DeSantis suspends elected state attorney.
So
my tongue is very tied tonight, but particularly with my R's. I don't know what's going on. But anyways, Ron DeSantis suspends elected state attorney for opposing abortion ban and anti-LGBTQ laws.
Correct.
How is he able to do this, and what's going on here?
So Andrew Warren is an elected Democratic state attorney for Hillsborough County. Warren pledged to not enforce any laws that prohibited gender-affirming care for transgender youth or prosecuting people who aid, abet, or receive an abortion. So essentially, Andrew Warren is an attorney who is saying, I will not basically bring charges against anyone if they are providing gender-affirming care or they are out seeking an abortion. DeSantis said that by choosing to not enforce these laws, he is basing his carrying out of the law on his personal agenda and has violated his oath of office. So DeSantis suspended a duly elected official and appointed a judge to serve in that capacity. The Constitution of Florida has given veto power, or has vested the veto power in the governor, not in individual state attorneys. So when you flagrantly violate your oath of office, when you make yourself above the law, you have violated your duty, you have neglected your duty, and you are displaying a lack of competence to be able to perform those duties. The state does give the governor the power to suspend state officials for different reasons, including neglect, incompetence, inability to perform. So, basically the attorney came out and said, I'm not going to press charges against somebody if they're giving gender affirming care. I'm not going to press charges against somebody if they're trying to get an abortion. And Governor DeSantis said, you are basically in a position of writing, overriding the law, when in all reality, every state attorney in any way has a right to choose whether or not to press charges in a criminal investigation.
Mm-hmm. It was one of those where they're right on both sides. Technically, DeSantis is right. I hate to say it to agree with anything that he says, but yeah, if essentially an attorney general says he's not going to carry out the law, then yeah, he's within his right to remove him. I think it would have been wiser to say like something along the lines of a case by case basis, and just all the cases that came in, you chose not to prosecute it. It seems interesting that you would come out so directly about it, unless this was the outcome he was expecting. I really did like what he said in a tweet about the "Don't Say Gay" bill. He said that he was disgusted to see the passage of the bill at a time when our state needs to unite to solve important problems. This bill fosters prejudice and hatred, and our society already has enough of both. We deserve elected leaders who care more about the public policies that help Floridians than partisan tricks that divide us. Mm-hmm. So a great person to have in a place of power in Florida. Unfortunately, it seems like he took too strong of a stance against this, and it was within DeSantis's right to remove him, which is just unfortunate.
So now here's the thing. I think this is an important article to share with you all, not because, it's one more thing from Florida. And just like the theme tonight is, if you do not know how your rights can be taken away legally, you need to be reading, you need to be studying, you need to be learning, because the rights that you have, or you believe you have, it can be taken away from you under legal means if you're not aware. So please, please, please educate yourself. This is an elected official removed because he chose to do what he felt was right in the face of a law he felt was wrong.
Mm-hmm. We got an article with some positive news to it here. A little bit of a positive spin. An unhinged gun owner finally arrested after years of harassing and threatening Pride organizers. What's going on here?
So Robert Faring was sentenced after pleading guilty in February to one count of mailing threatening communications. He had been sending letters and making threats toward Pride Month organizers, government officials, other LGBTQ leaders and individuals over the course of 8 years. And a couple of examples of his writing include, quote, "All of you should be shot, hung, exterminated." And those were to the owners of the Stonewall Inn, basically saying, "We will blow up or burn down your establishment." So this individual was finally arrested and was charged. When a search warrant was acted upon, agents found several stolen Pride flags, 2 loaded shotguns with nearly 400 rounds of ammunition, 2 stun guns, and a stamped envelope containing a dead bird that he had planned reportedly to send to a pro-LGBTQ plus attorney.
Not sure I understand the symbolism there, but just a quality person that is going where they belong. Anti-drag queen TV journalist Carrie Lake wins GOP primary for Arizona governor. What's going on?
Right. So this is an individual that we've kind of been keeping in the background, or at least I've been keeping in the background and keeping an eye on. Carrie Lake has been basically running on Donald Trump's endorsement. She is opposed to drag queens. She is very much a part of the yay, yay, God crowd. On social media in June, she wrote, "They kicked God out of schools and welcomed the drag queens. They took down our flag and replaced it with a rainbow. They seek to disarm Americans and militarize our enemies. Let's bring back the basics, God, guns, and glory." So this is the individual who is now being pushed forward as the GOP primary candidate for governor in Arizona.
God, guns, and glory. Wow. All right. In Little Heroes news, a trans 8-year-old girl sues the state for not letting her use school restrooms like everyone else.
Yeah. An 8-year-old girl in Tennessee is suing the Tennessee's Department of Education over its Accommodations for All Children's Act, which bans trans students from using school bathrooms that correspond to their gender identity. The Human Rights Campaign filed a lawsuit on behalf of this child and her parents, and the law allows cisgender public school students and their families to sue if they're not given a reasonable accommodation by their school if they don't want to share bathrooms, locker rooms, and other facilities with trans people. Now, stop and grasp this. The law allows cisgender people to sue a school if reasonable accommodations are not given to segregate their cisgender child if there's transgender children also using the restroom. Now, the thing is that what happens is that transgender children are told to use a separate single occupancy restroom somewhere else in the school. And in many cases, it is not easily accessible for a student. And so they may have to walk a distance within the building to get to that single occupancy restroom. It may be in a teacher's lounge. It may be in a nurse's area, something along those lines. But those accommodations aren't being made for the cisgender. Those accommodations are being made upon the transgender child. They are being forced to use those special accommodations. Now, this particular child, 8 years old, remember, was being forced to go and use a restroom, but they experienced, that if they didn't eat or drink during the day, it minimized the amount of times that they had to go to the restroom. So they would stop eating and stop drinking during school hours. This then led to migraines and acid reflux and nightmares of school. This is a child who's basically being traumatized by this. And so she and her family are now suing the state of Tennessee in hopes of getting this reviewed.
Good. That's a good bit of advocacy there, and I hope that there's something positive comes of this.
Yeah.
At least in reversing that other ridiculous law.
Oh yeah.
Well, y'all, as soon as we get out, as soon as we think we're out, we get sucked back in. We're going back to Florida. The Florida Surgeon General spreading misinformation on vaccines now. What is What's going on here? And more.
So Joseph Lopato, this is the same Surgeon General involved in the banning of gender-affirming care, is basically coming out and saying that people should not trust the monkeypox vaccine because there's not enough data on it to support, a safe rollout of it. And basically, this is the same individual who was promoting bad COVID-19 information, as well as supporting Ron DeSantis's financial scheme in getting COVID treatment medicines into Florida and not using vaccines. So this individual is basically just going out there and saying, hey, don't trust these monkeypox vaccines. They're not reliable.
And the interesting thing, so a study of 400 individuals found that it was as effective as the smallpox vaccine, and we all know and trust the smallpox vaccine. It was all but completely eradicated, and now so this study of 400 folks confirmed that it's as effective as that. Now, I don't know that 400 is enough to quantify as a successful study that that if that's enough evidence. I would think that is not typically enough, but the claim that that there's no proof that it works, or that that the proof is false or whatever is it's just fear mongering and ridiculous, and it's gonna hurt a lot of people. My spiteful side isn't super disappointed in this. I am not super worried about anti-LGBT people catching monkeypox in droves. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, now we start to get a little bit ridiculous here, and this will be fun. A school district has slapped warning labels on books with LGBTQ characters. Warning labels.
Yeah.
Warning labels. What is going on here, Jamie?
Warning labels that would look similar to what is on a cigarette package. But
great.
This is what one of the warning labels reads. This advisory notice shall serve to inform you that this book has been identified by some community members as unsuitable for students.
Now what? What?
Yeah.
Okay. That is ridiculous. That is a crazy stretch. That is pure speculation, and it's completely subjective.
It's censorship. I mean, this is book burning. This is book.
You can put a warning label and say that there are LGBT characters and themes in here. That is, again, ridiculous, but still, it's factual. It's within reason.
Yeah.
Deemed by some people in the community as unsuitable for certain audiences or whatever the hell it is. Like, that is so beyond the pale and so ridiculous. And wow.
Yeah. Hang on just a second, Em.
Wow. That just has me so frustrated, because I just think that that's the concept. A lot of times I don't have time to go in and research the articles very well. So I'm working off the headlines here a lot of the time. And the concept of the headline is ridiculous enough to me. But the fact that the content of the warning label is able to be so tinfoil hat ridiculous, that is extremely frustrating.
Yeah. So the last sentence in the advisory notice reads, the decision as to whether this book is suitable or unsuitable shall be the decision of the parents, who has the right to oversee his or her child's education consistent with state law. Now that one I find very interesting.
Yes.
How can a parent decide whether something is suitable or unsuitable if they most likely have not read it because it disagreed with their opinion. You can't decide whether something is suitable or unsuitable. All you can decide on is whether or not you are going to allow it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same thing.
Well, that the determination of whether it's suitable or not is up to the parent is the basic premise of life, like of having a child. Like, it's ridiculous that they would put a warning label and to state that, which is the basically underlying understood premise of being a parent, is that it's up to you to choose what's suitable and not. So to go out and put a warning label on something suggests that it is dangerous, that there is something wrong with it, that there is a potential for harm in it. And that is an attack. That is a blatant attack, saying that and what it's going to do is it's going to force casual parents to be like, ooh, I don't know, not casual parents, but the ones that don't feel they have the time to read and review every single piece of content, which they make a general choice on whether or not they're going to trust the teachers, the libraries, and all these sorts of things, and believe that something would be safe. This warning is going to make them be second guess that and think, well, I shouldn't show them this. I shouldn't allow them to have this book then. Mm-hmm. Whereas the reasonable assumption that it's up to the parent to decide if it's suitable or not was already there. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if I'm articulating myself well because I'm so frustrated, but whatever. This one got me. I mean, we've talked about some crap today, but
the next one is the one that gets me.
Okay. Well, let's get Jeannie on her soapbox here. Conservatives claim victory as violent threats cancel LGBTQ plus student event.
This is in Fayetteville, so this was just 25 miles away from me. There was an event that was happening at the Fayetteville Public Library. It was scheduled to be held. And there is an LGBTQ youth organization here that's called the Equality Crew. And they are trying to do what they can to find resources and help LGBTQ youth in Northwest Arkansas. This was supposed to be a resource fair with a picnic and a concert and a dance party. There were going to be drag performers at the event. It was not a drag show. But as more and more information was released about this event, complaints began to filter into the library. And the library distanced itself and saying we didn't know what was involved. But the Equality Crew issued this statement. We're disappointed to share that due to safety concerns, we are canceling our back-to-school festival. The safety and well-being of the kiddos we work with, as well as volunteers, vendors, partners, and staff, are always our top priority. On Thursday, July 28th, the Equality Crew was made aware of several direct communications made to the Fayetteville Public Library regarding the back-to-school festival. After reviewing the publicly posted communications and noting that they were increasing in violent and threatening language towards potential attendees, parents, volunteers, and organizations, we made the difficult decision to cancel the event. This was largely due in part to the increasing number of violent and disruptive attacks on parents, children, and organizers seeking to serve members of the LGBTQ plus community or provide inclusive programming, particularly in public library spaces around the world. Now, so this was being pushed into the public sphere, and more and more violent and threatening comments were being posted. So as this happened, the library took the precaution of saying, look, we're not going to do this. So the Equality Crew canceled it. Now, here's the thing. The push behind this was tracked back to a third place candidate for Senate. Jan Morgan was running for Senate, and she lost in third place. But after this event, she posted in big letters, "You won." Now, here's what she went on to say. "When I found out the Fayetteville Public Library, a taxpayer-funded facility, was hosting a drag show and transition closet for children, I asked you to help me stop this event. I gave you a contact list of library board members and a phone number. Thousands of you responded. You called, you emailed. It was overwhelming. Your response made a difference. The drag show for kids at your public library is now canceled." Now, she is trumpeting the victory that she made in getting this canceled.
Mm-hmm.
She goes on to say, "I don't push my views on sexuality on anyone, but LGBTQ positive events and politically correct gender pronoun garbage must stop, and Americans must quit cowering in fear of being labeled by haters for daring to speak out against the use of tax money to indoctrinate our children." I don't know how you can say, "I don't push my views on sexuality on anyone," while using inflammatory language such as politically correct gender pronoun garbage, being labeled by haters, being called indoctrinators, and then going on to say, "If protecting children from sexual grooming and sexual exploitation makes me a bigot, then so be it. You're asking for a war and we'll get it." This is an individual who was running for office in Arkansas, and she is slapping the backs of people who are using violence and threats against children to cancel an event. Now, the reason why this is so important to me is that the Transition Closet, an organization that works to provide wardrobe for transitioning people, was going to be a part of this and helping out. Transition Closet happens to be the organization that I did a modeling gig for a month or two ago. So this is an organization that I know something about. All they do is provide clothing. And yet she makes it sound like we were out to do some kind of horrible deed when all we were doing is giving clothes to kids before school. That's it.
Yeah, they've got this really tweaked, I don't even know what adjectives to use on this, but it's just, it's so infuriatingly twisted to say that helping and supporting people who need it is grooming. They have chosen one of the most disgusting words and concepts in polite modern culture to use their snowflake cancel culture agenda against us. And put children in danger. Like,
yeah.
It's, I don't get how this side and this set of beliefs has any momentum or any support. And yeah, I don't, because the thing, the overarching thing that we're dealing with here on Transistance, and the thing that we're talking about, is we're looking into the news and what is being done against our community and how we can combat it and how we can come back against it, push back, and fight for our rights. It's so difficult to find that path and to find that way of winning the argument when the argument against is just so ridiculous and absurd and so obviously false, and yet being so widely perpetuated and believed. It's I know we're here to talk about advocacy and changing these things and making life better for ourselves. Yes, selfishly, there is some of that in it. But for the children and the people that come after us, so that they don't have to go through what we went through. Either whether it's external forces, bullying, hatred, or the internal struggles that we face of self-hatred and worry about being ostracized, being a freak, all of these things. It's just so heartbreaking to have such a positive force and such a positive movement that we're part of, and have it be discounted in the most evil, as one of the most evil things out there, even though it's so obviously a ridiculous assertion. Don't get me wrong. This will not in any way dull my drive. The Transverse is going strong, and we will be going strong for a long time doing the advocacy and the things that we're doing. But my God, is this just infuriating and frustrating. And, it's one of those things where it gets hard to see the path forward.
So can I offer you a silver lining on this?
Of course.
Okay. So the other night, I made a comment that I really think we can work this to our advantage. We're being called pedophiles. We're being called groomers. We can't change that. But I think we need to change our tact. Instead of trying to change the people who want to call us that, I think we need to go to ice cream truck vendors and say, look, be thankful that transgender people are around now because you're no longer pedophiles. Now give us free ice cream for life.
Now, see, as fun as it is, yes, they're the ice cream vans, people with white unmarked vans of all stripes across the country. Yes. But the thing is you would, if that were true and that would work, you would think that logic would work with the church, who, as you pointed out very strongly and very well last week, is the predominant purveyor of grooming and child endangerment. And so you would think that with that logic, they would support us. But they're the main proponents of that myth. And I think it's like Trump did. It's a big distraction. Whatever horrible thing you're doing, just say that the other guy's doing it.
So I do have, I just want to throw this out there.
Okay.
You're right.
Thank you.
Would think that the church would, be more open to us. But two birds, one stone approach to this. Okay? Go through your closet. Find two things. First of all, find an outfit from your days before, maybe just t-shirt and jeans. And then find an outfit that you want to get rid of from your new life. Find out which church is having an open altar, and you bring that clothing in. You say, I'm going to repent from my dressing and being a transgender person. And you lay those clothes on the altar, you douse them with some, lighter fluid, and you light them, and you say, this is the proof. And I can bet you somebody will take you out to lunch afterwards. And if you work the church right, you get a pretty good meal out of that. Probably a lot of fried chicken.
Ooh.
You can find a church that's having a Sunday dinner after church, and you did that, then it's buffet all day long, baby. You pick whatever you want.
You're asking a lot to hang out with those people, with those types.
Oh, they'll avoid you. They'll invite you to eat, but they won't talk to you. I promise. Okay. You've already done the hard work of repenting up at the front of the church.
Sort of win-win then. I like it. Okay.
See, I'm telling you. Win-win, two birds, one stone. Oh, honey. Oh, Mira Featherbender. I got to tell you something. If you have never had Southern Women's fried chicken at a church dinner, oh, Lordy, honey, you are going to have to be awakened to that realization because, damn, Southern women can cook.
Remind me when I come down there. I will. We'll hit a thrift store and get some crap women's clothes and dress in our most boyish. God, it would be. See, that alone, at this point in my transition, that alone would be just absolutely horrific. Wow.
Well, Mira, if you're from Alabama and you're saying that your church women don't make good enough food, then, honey, we got to get you to some better churches. There's some damn good food out there. I'm sorry, Mira.
Alrighty. Conservatives sue school for refusing to out transgender students.
So this goes back to the law that we were talking about in Tennessee, where a cisgender family can sue a school. Now, the Parents Defending Education, which is a conservative, right-leaning parent support group, I guess, has sued the Linn-Mar Community School District in Iowa because the policy that they have to protect transgender students from trans-antagonistic, transphobic parents and students basically would remove their understanding of how parents can provide for the better safety of their child. It takes issue with the part of the policy that says that a student's gender support plan would be withheld from parents. Even if the parents, request it, the school system can refuse that request and not present the gender support plan. It says that because parents are notified about things like schoolyard tussles, missing homeworks, and social events, the school should notify parents about a kid's gender identity. Otherwise, parents won't be able to properly support their kid. The fact that nearly 50% of trans people in the U.S. experience familial rejection when they came out as trans might have something to do with why this is not a great idea. If you want to have 50% of your trans student population in school to become homeless, absolutely. Let's follow through with the parents defending freedom, whatever the bullshit that is. But let's basically say, hey, yeah, we don't mind that kids are going to get thrown out of the house. We don't mind that their kids are going to get abused. We don't mind that their kids are going to be attacked for this. We just think that every parent has the right to discipline their child the way they want to. Yeah, Kari, that's the thing, the abuse comes at the outing, whether that child is outing themselves or the school or any other group is outing them. That's when the abuse happens. But now we have states who are putting in place laws that not only unlock the ability for abuse, but encourage it. And yes, I mean that wholeheartedly. It encourages the abuse of the parent.
Is that altogether different than the abortion laws? And, especially when it comes to like rape and incest?
In the case of that, that's still being fought over. We don't know where that one's going to land, but in this case, basically it is to sue to get a school district to release this information is basically telling the school, you need to provide the justification for a parent to abuse their child, because that is what will happen. This is not a possibility. This is not fear-mongering. This is statistically backed. Mm-hmm. We have seen 50% of kids dehomed. We don't know exactly the number who have been abused because not all of them report. So let's keep an eye on this lawsuit and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. I wish there was some kind of case of the students banding together to protect their fellow students, protect their LGBT.
We've reported on that.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the school where they said, hey, look, we're going to, contact every parent if there's a transgender student who's in an athletic organization or is in an activity organization, and they're going to be sharing restrooms or changing rooms or in hotels on, overnight stays or something like that. So you have this school system who's going to do this. The kids who were supportive of their trans and gay schoolmates basically said, fine, then all of us are going to report ourselves as gay or trans. Mm. And we're going to make you report, we're going to make you inform everybody in this school system of all of us, mm-hmm. so that we can protect a few.
Yeah. And I hope there's something that comes of that for this case as well.
Yeah.
Let's move on to everybody's least favorite.
Hey, we only have like 11 minutes left, Em.
We gotta burn through this, and let's burn through a lot of our biggest transphobe bigot out there, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene for vice president? ? Trump is reportedly considering it.
Yeah. Trump has come out and said that he is, he's making noise. There's no way that he's going to consider a female running mate because, well, hell, he couldn't sexually harass them without everybody in the entire world knowing it, because it would be on wide open television, and he would, broadcast it. But yeah, there is noise that Trump has floated the idea of picking Marjorie Taylor Greene as his running mate. So yeah.
A Texas Baptist hate preacher says that he wouldn't vote for Marjorie Taylor Greene, though, because she's a woman.
This is funny because this is intersectionality at its best. So we've talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene and how she hates LGBTQ people. And we've talked about Jonathan Shelley of the Steadfast Baptist Church down in Hurst, Texas, and how they hate LGBTQ people. Well, now you have an anti-LGBTQ preacher basically saying, I do not in any way, shape, or form support Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's a woman and doesn't have any right telling a man what to do by leading in the country. Said, I will never vote for a woman politician, whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a conservative. She's on InfoWars, but she's a woman and she's not going to fix this country.
Well, it's funny because she would, from some things she said in the past, I would think that she would agree with him. Like she said that, women are subservient to men, like in pretty much as many words. She also claims that lesbian parents don't understand parenting. What's going on in this article?
Karine Jean-Pierre, who is the White House press secretary, is who she was referring to. Jean-Pierre is lesbian. And she is married to a partner, and she has a daughter. But Greene was saying that she doesn't understand. She responded that the Biden administration can understand what parents are going through. Caregivers, moms and dads, grandparents. What we've done the work, and we'll continue to do the work to make sure that our families, can feed their kids. She claims they're doing the work every day. Karine claims that they care about families and babies. She claims that she understands, but she doesn't have children, and I think she's married to a woman, so obviously she doesn't really understand that. I don't even know if they have children, which seems strange that a sitting member of Congress does not know whether or not the White House press secretary has a family before she goes on a talk show to insult her. But anyway,
about her family.
Right. But Marjorie Taylor Greene just does not care, as you know, about facts. So, she's willing to spout any kind of crap.
As we said, the right doesn't really care about facts. They're sort of anti them. Now, if there was anybody that could possibly give Marjorie Taylor Greene a good run for her money in transphobia and bigotry, it would be Lauren Boebert, who suggests that monkeypox was made up by Democrats to win the midterms.
Yep. Okay. Democrats made up monkeypox to win in the midterm elections. She said, we know exactly what causes this monkeypox, and they're not doing anything. No, actually, you're a bigot if you talk about it. They're not canceling exactly where the outbreaks are taking place, even though some local and state governments shut down churches and restaurants during COVID. And I think it's interesting. We have midterm elections coming up, and suddenly there's a new health emergency from the federal government. She said sarcastically, President Ronald Reagan, I'm not looking for zombie Reagan to come and save America, but he really did say it best. He said the most dangerous words are, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help. So she just went on and on and on, trying to just make very little of monkeypox.
The one that I really wanted to get to tonight, I'm very excited about this. And again, it'll be information that will be completely ignored by the right. New study debunks the myth that kids become trans through social contagion, quote unquote. What's going on here?
So rapid onset gender dysphoria is a diagnosis that has been tossed out over the last few years to describe why there is a sudden blooming of transgender youth. And the definition of it is a social contagion. The reason why youth are coming out as trans and gender diverse is that they've been exposed to a gender ideology that convinces them that they don't have to be the gender or the sex they were assigned at birth. And so the study has come out and it says, well, believe it or not, that's bullshit. Granted, this was not the exact language that they used because this was a scholarly document from the journal Pediatrics. But what they found was that there is no proof to the idea of a rapid onset social contagion that is creating trans youth right now. The number of trans and gender diverse youth identified in the survey dropped from 2017 to 2019 from 2.4 to 1.6. So what we're actually seeing is we're seeing a reaction to representation. We're seeing a reaction to the bringing in of public exposure of the existence of transgender people, but they want to blame the expansion of representation and visibility on some kind of contagion that is contaminating youth and children. And, this goes back to what you were saying. No, the right's not going to give one flip and fly and fluck about this. They don't care about the facts. They don't care about statistics. But the reality is we have to talk about this stuff. We have to talk about this study. If you can't read academic studies or you can't read scientific journals, and I know some people can't because they are complex and they are hard to get around some of the languages. But if you can't get into that, at least have a conversation about the presence of this. At least talk about the reality that the studies are being done, the science is being done to back who we are. So just get out there, find out where the studies are coming from, who's doing them. If you're not sure about them, reach out to me. I don't know about Em. I'm not going to volunteer her, but definitely reach out to me if you want help understanding a study that's come out, because I've read studies, I've done all of that kind of stuff, but I know it's not easy. So please reach out to me if you want to know more about something that's coming out.
Yeah, I don't like helping people, clearly, so don't reach out to me. Yes, absolutely. I am. My DMs are always open on all my socials, and I do read all of it. So definitely contact me if you would like to. Okay, this might be a little bit of a jump ahead in articles, but there's a victory that we can celebrate here. We've been talking a little bit about Medicaid and rights for trans folks. A court rules for transgender West Virginia Medicaid participants denied healthcare coverage. I feel like this is an important one. What's going on here?
This is super important. So on August 2nd, the federal district court ruled that the West Virginia Medicaid program could not discriminate. Now, I think we may have even captured this one last week. But the court certified the lawsuit as a class action. So it covers all transgender people in West Virginia who participate in Medicaid. That's big, because we've seen, like in Texas, the lawsuits down there about having trans kids removed from their home as a case-by-case thing. This is a class action, so it applies to anyone in West Virginia who happens to be on Medicaid and transgender. Your Medicaid cannot discriminate or deny you health care. And that's big news. That's huge, huge stuff.
We have 1 minute left. I want to sneak something in, but let's see. What do we do? Let's try this one about the pastor. Pastor kicked out of church over gay sex and drugs faces fresh misconduct allegations. What's going on here? Let's throw the church under a little bit.
A few years back, Pastor Ted Haggard was caught up in a scandal where he was regularly paying for a male escort and was regularly using methamphetamine. At that time, he was in a church and he was very loudly decrying gays and, drug addicts and all of those kind of things. So he left the church after all of that, admitting that he had bought meth and had been in a sexual activity with a sex worker. He went out and founded a new church. But Ted Haggard has now been accused of inappropriate sexual misconduct by 2 young men, one of whom was a minor at the time that it happened. But he is being accused of impropriety in the pastoral office once again. And so now he is looking at being kicked from his own church that he started. Y'all, we can't, they write the news for us. They write the news for us. They come out and they say, we are the pedophiles. We are the groomers. We are the predators. And then they turn around and they show themselves to be what they claim others are. So there you go. Take it, run with it, do with it what you will. We lost Emily. Her computer crashed. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for us tonight because it is time for us to close the show. But want to wish all of you the best in the coming week. Get out there, learn a lot so we can do a lot, so we can grow a lot. Thank you all very much. We'll talk to you next week on Transistance.